seeking to understand the hydroclimatological processes and their connection with the nature and humans. So he has obtained his PhD and masters from IIT Guwahati and BTech from NIT Hamirpur. He has also work experience from University of Nebraska, USA, and McGill University, Canada. And he has also obtained some prestigious fellowship, just like Wari Fellowship, that is belongs to India and USA, linked with India and USA, and Sastri Indo-Canadian Institute Fellowship, that is linked between the India and Canada. So his area of interest, he has number of papers, just like he has 13 journal papers and 3 book chapters as well, in the field of ecosystem resilience, hydroclimatology, and hydrological modeling, climate extremes, and all. So I would like to call Dr. Ashutosh Sharma to start his presentation. And Dr. Ashutosh Sharma, I'm
Yes,
audible?
yes. Yeah, I
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay.
So thank you, Dr. Goswami, for the beautiful introduction. I really appreciate that. And I'm thankful to you as well as other coordinators for inviting me for this talk. So I will begin my talk with this. I'm going to share my screen, and please let me know if you can see it.
Sure.
So can you see my screen?
Uh, no. Yeah,
No.
it's coming. It's coming. It's coming.
Okay. All right.
Wait
Fine.
for a second. Yeah.
So,
Nah,
is
yeah,
it
it's coming. Yeah.
okay? Thank you. So, as Dr. Goswami mentioned, that I'm presently working at Penn State University as a postdoctoral scholar. So today's talk is about a topic called ecosystem resilience to the droughts. So here I'll be discussing a method which I developed during my PhD program, and based on this method, we also published some journal articles, and the results of this article were like widely I would say like widely accepted by the research community, as well as it drew attention from the different media. For example, it was published in the Hindu national newspaper as well as in the Hindustan Times. So in today's talk, I'll first discuss what is the concept of resilience, as well as I will want to talk about terrestrial ecosystems for a while so that we all understand what I'm going to talk about. And then I'll be discussing the framework that we proposed for assessing the resilience of these terrestrial ecosystems to drought. And finally, I'll end my presentation with the discussion on 2 of the case studies of this resilience framework, which we carried out for India at river basin scale and district scale. So the concept of resilience, it started around 1973, and it was started by a person called Hollings, who belonged to the field of ecology. And it was basically used to understand the response of a system to external disturbance. Now, these systems, they can be any systems, any natural system or human systems. For example, we can consider a system as like human health as a system where we will be looking at the response of a human body to different kind of diseases which will act as disturbances. And we can also apply it to some man-made systems. For example, let's say for a building, we have a building structure, then we can consider the earthquake as a disturbance, and we will try to see that how the system which is building is responding to those disturbances. And if we have to define resilience, then in simple terms, we can define resilience of any system as its ability to absorb disturbance. And by absorbing disturbance, I mean that the system tries to resist change due to that disturbance. So that is one part of the resilience framework. And the second is to recover to its equilibrium state after the disturbance. So we are also trying to look into the property of a system, of its recovery after getting disturbed due to some extreme circumstances. Now, we have some other concepts, for example, stability concept, resistance, and adaptation concepts, which are somehow linked or similar to the resilience concept. However, it is quite different from resilience, from these concepts. For example, if we talk about stability concept, then here we only focus on one equilibrium state generally, and our focus is only to see whether a system is stable or not. Like, we don't look into the property of a system to recover to its initial state or something like that. So in that way, the concept of resilience is somewhat different from these mentioned concepts. As I said earlier, the concept, it has been widely used in the recent decades in different disciplines, from finance or economics or natural resources management, engineering. And engineering, I think all the fields of engineering, they have employed this concept to analyze the response of their respective systems to disturbances. For example, in computer science, you will find the applications of this concept in looking into the response of a computer network or computer hardware to some extreme circumstances. And similarly, it is also used for in the fields like psychology, where physicians, they try to study the human psychology for a trauma or something like that. Now, resilience concept, it is further divided into two parts, or we can say that we classify resilience in two different ways. First, we call engineering resilience, and the second one is ecological resilience. So it is important to understand the difference between these two classes of resilience, so that we can efficiently use these methods for our research. So in engineering, resilience is basically a form of resilience where we consider that our system has only one state of equilibrium. However, in ecological, we consider that there can be more than one stable equilibriums. And what I mean by these stable equilibriums, like, it's a state where the system is balanced, like its functionality or its responses are not affected by any disturbance. For example, here, this is very standard form of describing a system in terms of its resilience. So here we have this cup and ball representation of a system. So a system which is like at the lower end of this cup, which is represented by blue color here, we call this system at equilibrium. Like, this is the equilibrium of system. However, whenever there is a disturbance, the system moves to some other state, which is basically the disturbed state of a system. Now, in engineering resilience concept, we say that there's only one state of equilibrium, and after a disturbance, the system has to return to this position, to the initial equilibrium state. However, in some cases, we find that there can be more than one equilibrium states or one stable states, which is depicted in the second figure here. So here we can see that we have two different curves, which means that the system can have more than one equilibrium state, and after a disturbance, it can move to some other state rather than returning to its initial state. To give you an example of this, for example, if we have a forest ecosystem, and there is a forest fire. So, like, after a forest fire, the trees and the vegetations in the forest, they try to recover, but they may not be able to have the same condition as they had before the fire, which means that they have attained a new state where they are stable. The whole system is in an equilibrium. However, this state is different from the initial state. So in case of engineering resilience, our focus is on the recovery rate. Like, we try to see that how fast our system can recover, can come back to its initial state of equilibrium. And on the side of ecological resilience, we are more focused on finding the threshold. Now, threshold is a value of the system's performance after which the system cannot return to its previous state, but it tries to attain the new state. So here in ecological resilience, our focus should be on the on this threshold, which is the magnitude of disturbance after which the system goes to another state, or our focus is generally on the reorganizational capacity of the system, that how efficiently it can reorganize itself so that it can attain a new equilibrium state. But in theory, the ecological resilience concept, it sounds very good. However, in practical applications, identifying this threshold is really difficult, because there are many factors which affect the system's performance, and sometimes we cannot really identify this threshold. So in practical applications, mostly we use the concept of engineering resilience. Now, the next thing is that how can we use a resilience concept, and what are the things that we have to consider if we want to assess the resilience of our systems. So the first thing is that we have to identify some attributes, or these are also called the identity of the system. And these are the attributes which tells us about the functioning or the response of the system. For example, if we consider a human body and we want to see that what is the impact of disease on the human body, then we have to identify some parameters which can tell us about the functioning. For example, if we are considering a case of simple fever, then we can use temperature values as the measure of functioning of human body. And if temperature goes above or below the normal temperature, then we can say that the human body is affected by the disturbances, which could be any viruses. So the thing is that these attributes or these identities, they have to be identified in such a way that they are quantitative in nature. Like we can actually evaluate them in terms of the numbers. Like they should have some quantitative value associated with them. And second important aspect here is that we should have a very well-defined disturbance. Like the disturbance, whatever we are considering, it should be very well-defined, and it should also be quantitatively measured, so that we can actually see that what was the phase where this disturbance happened, and then with respect to the magnitude of disturbance, we can analyze the change in the attributes. And these attributes, generally, they are also called the identity of the system, which is a measure of system's response or its functioning. And the resilience analysis, it always revolves around how this identity is changing with time, or what are the factors which are threatening this identity, which are basically the disturbances. So the second topic, not the topic, but the application that I will be presenting here is based on ecosystem resilience. So before going into the details of our method, I just want to walk you through over this concept that what is ecosystem resilience, what is terrestrial ecosystems and how do they function. I think you might have heard about terrestrial ecosystems in the basic science classes. The terrestrial ecosystem is basically a land-based community of organisms. So this includes living organisms such as plants as well as other organisms as well. Yes, and it also contains some non-biotic or abiotic components such as climate. So like it's a community where we consider living organisms or living plants, and we study their interaction with other living organisms or plants within the same community, as well as abiotic component, which can be like no-living components such as climate. So this is what like terrestrial ecosystem is all about. Like we have some plants and some organisms and some non-biotic abiotic components. And if we see that terrestrial ecosystems cover around 28% area of the earth, and they're mostly like they're the ecosystems which are on the land, like they're the land-based ecosystems. However, we have aquatic ecosystems as well, which are under the water. For example, there are ecosystems in the sea or in the rivers. Those are, or in the lakes, they are called aquatic ecosystems. Now, here's the important term which is called productivity. So I'll be referring to this term many times during my presentation. So I just want to make it clear. So productivity is the rate of generation of biomass, and biomass is any organic biomass which is generated by any form of the living organisms or the plants in an ecosystem. So we generally measure this productivity in terms of the amount of biomass in the ecosystem. So this can be in terms of like the total actual mass of the biomass, which can be measured as, for example, if we talk about a forest ecosystem, then we can measure the total amount of weight of the leaves and the plant and the stems and branches, like all the components which are there in the ecosystem. However, this productivity can further be divided into two different classes, such as primary productivity and secondary productivity. The primary productivity is the part which is produced by the autotrophs or the primary producers, which are plants. So these are the components which are on the top of the food chain, and these primary producers such as plants, they are capable of converting the inorganic carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into the organic carbon dioxide in the form of biomass. So here our study focuses on on the primary productivity of an ecosystem. However, the second type of productivity is the secondary productivity, which is the biomass which is generated by the animals, like those who rely on the primary producers. However, we are not focusing on the secondary productivity here, but we are more concerned with the productivity from the plants or the vegetations which are there on the ground. So as I said, like primary productivity is the biomass which is generated by the plants or the vegetations, and it is driven by a process called photosynthesis. I am sure that you all are aware of this. So it's just a process by which the plants or vegetations, they take atmospheric carbon dioxide, and in the presence of water and light, they convert it to an organic form in the form of carbohydrates or sugars. So this process is called the primary production. Now, measuring primary production is itself a complicated task, and we have different different estimates of the primary production. For example, one of the measure is the gross primary production. We have net primary production, and there are some other definitions through which we can estimate the total amount of biomass which is generated by a terrestrial ecosystem. And the main here in this study, I have mainly used the net primary production as the estimate for the carbon uptake or the generation of biomass by the ecosystem, which is defined in terms of gross primary production. So gross primary production is basically the total amount of chemical energy or the biomass that plants created. So like, for example, during the process of precipitation, during the process of photosynthesis, whatever amount of inorganic carbon dioxide is converted by the primary producers to organic carbon dioxide, that whole amount of carbon will be treated as gross primary production. However, at the same time, there's a process called respiration which goes on in plants as well as in the animals. So during this process, the plants, they release some of the carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. So if we subtract that respiration from the gross primary production, then we will get this net primary production, which is basically the net amount of biomass which stays with the terrestrial ecosystems or the vegetations. So here our focus will be on net primary production. Now there's another term here which is very important and very significant to the study that I'm going to present, which is ecosystem water use efficiency. Now this term is a link between carbon cycle and the water cycle. It means that here we are trying to see that how efficiently the ecosystem can use water to produce the biomass. So it will be a ratio of some form of carbon uptake or some form of amount of biomass which is generated and the water which was lost from the ecosystem during this process. And there are different ways we can compute ecosystem water use efficiency depending on the estimates of carbon uptake. For example, we can use gross primary production for the estimate of carbon uptake, and we can also use NPT. So like depending on the estimates of carbon uptake and the water lost from the system, we can have different forms or different quantities, quantifications for water efficiency.
Sir, PPT is not coming, sir. Once again, you can share the PPT, please.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let me go. Okay, can you see my screen now? Can you see my screen?
Vikram sir, is it okay now?
No, sir. The screen is not coming. I think.
Actually, actually, I can see the presentation.
Okay, then no issue.
Okay, continue,
Okay,
Dr. Ashutosh.
Yeah, thank you. I'll go ahead. So now, with this background, I want to talk about the main topic of today's presentation, which is resilience of terrestrial ecosystems to drought. So this work that I'm going to present is based on a method that we developed, me and my PhD supervisor, and it is based on these two papers that we published in the year 2018 in two different journals. So the first question is that why do we want to analyze the resilience of terrestrial ecosystems, and what is the need of this study? So as we know that the major motivation for this study, it comes from climate change. I'm sure that all of you must have heard about climate change, and you also know about what are the consequences of climate change and why is it so important. So as we know, like currently climate change is basically seen as greatest environmental threat because it is affecting almost all the natural as well as human-made systems. So like although climate change is mainly happening in the climate component of the Earth's atmosphere. However, the consequences or the impact of climate change is there in all the human and natural systems. We cannot there's not even a single system which is not affected. For example, if we see this diagram on the right hand side, so it summarizes all the driving factors as well as the impacts of climate change. So mainly the climate change is arising because of the greenhouse gases emission or land use land cover changes such as deforestation, which is leading to the increase in the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere. And its direct impact we can see in the climate system. For example, we have found that the temperatures around the world, they are increasing, as well as it has direct impact on the hydrological cycle, such as the patterns of precipitation are changing due to increasing temperature. More precipitation is happening in the term of rainfall. So these all are the direct impacts of the climate change. However, these processes, they are further linked to different human or natural systems. For example, the agriculture systems, they are also directly linked to hydrological as well as climatological systems, and therefore they are also affected. Not only the natural system.
Sorry, Dr. Ashutosh, to interrupt you. Your PPT is not visible to us.
Oh,
then can you share it again?
Okay, I'll try.
Close it and share it again.
So I just so can you see the screen now?
Now it's visible to me, and all the audience, please let me know if it is visible to all or not.
Yes, sir, it's visible to us. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay. Thank you so much.
yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Continue, Dr. Sharma.
Why is this happening? If it disappears, you just let me know. I'll reshare again. Thank you.
Okay. No, it's coming. Okay. Thank you.
It's all right then. Thank you.
Okay.
So basically, I was referring to this figure on the right-hand side, which summarizes the drivers as well as the impacts of climate change. And I was saying that climate change does not only affect the natural systems such as hydrological systems, but it has impact on almost all the human systems as well. For example, if we talk about healthcare, then there are studies which has found that climate change is directly influencing the human health on this planet. So if we talk about the future projections of the climate, like there have been different studies where we are using advanced models to see that what will be the climate in future, but it is full of uncertainties that we cannot really predict the future's climate. Therefore, that we don't really know that what is going to happen. So under these uncertain climatic projections, it is very important that we analyze our systems, the present systems, to understand that whether they are capable enough to withstand the disturbances that they might have to face in future because of the climate change. So here, if we talk about the relation between climate change and the terrestrial ecosystems, then we find that terrestrial ecosystems are also severely affected by these hydroclimatic disturbances such as drought, which are arising from the climate change. And the reason is that all the human and natural systems, they are highly interconnected in nature. For example, the climate systems, they are connected to the hydrological systems, which are further connected to the terrestrial ecosystem, and which even are further connected to human system. Like all the systems, they are highly interconnected. So any disturbance in one of these systems is propagated to the other systems. For example, if we have a drought, which is a climate phenomena, it affects the hydrology, which further affects the terrestrial ecosystem. So recent studies have found that the past droughts, they have significantly affected the vegetation productivity, and this can have a huge impact on the food production, which is a major concern for a country like India, especially when we have such a large population with around 1.3 billion people. So if our ecosystems are not well prepared for drought conditions, which are also getting severe and worse with the climate change, then it can be a drastic problem for India. So therefore, our study comes into picture where we are proposing a method which we can use to analyze the resilience or analyze the capacity of our terrestrial ecosystems, and we can find out that what part of the countries have the least resilient terrestrial ecosystem, so that we can develop policies to enhance the resilience of these systems, or we can have some adaptation plan with us which can help us in withstanding such conditions when the vegetation productivity is low due to the climate change. So ecosystem resilience here, we are defining as the capacity of an ecosystem to respond to a disturbance by resisting the damage or by recovering quickly. Basically, this is the standard definition of resilience. However, here we are applying this to the terrestrial ecosystems. So in any resilience study, or in the concept of resilience, we have something called disturbance, which is the bad event or the drastic event which affect the system. So here we are considering drought as the disturbance. However, to analyze the terrestrial ecosystems, we can have different kinds of disturbances. For example, we can consider forest fire as a disturbance which affect the terrestrial ecosystems. However, here in this case, our study is mainly focused on droughts. For a second point here is as I mentioned in the previous slide, that if we want to do any resilience analysis, then we should have a quantitative measure that can tell us about the ecosystem's functioning and its response. So here in this study, we are using this ecosystem water use efficiency, which I defined in my previous slides. And the importance here of using ecosystem water use efficiency is that it links both terrestrial ecosystems carbon cycle and the water cycle, which we are trying to see. We are trying to see that how the droughts, which is a hydrological phenomena, is affecting the productivity of terrestrial ecosystems, which is actually a part of carbon cycle. So this indicator here, it serves the purpose that it is relating these two cycles. So I think I already mentioned what water use efficiency is. That I'm again going to repeat this. So water use efficiency is basically a ratio of the carbon uptake and the water use, and it can simply tell us about that how efficiently the ecosystems are using the water to produce the biomass or the vegetations. So we can have different estimates of water use efficiency depending on the estimates of carbon uptake and water use. For example, in our study, we are using net primary production as an estimate of carbon uptake. So it's telling us that how much vegetation is produced over a period of time. And for water, we are using evapotranspiration as an estimate of water which was available with the vegetations to produce the biomass. So in our case, the definition will be the ratio of net primary production and the evapotranspiration. So here's the overview of the proposed methods. So here we considered a hypothesis that if ecosystem is resilient, then it should use its water more efficiently under the drought conditions. However, there have been studies in the past which indicate that vegetations or the terrestrial ecosystems, they have their inherent property to use water more efficiently under the condition of less water. So using this hypothesis or using this approach, we have proposed an index called resilience index. This resilience index is defined as the ratio of water use efficiency during the dry period and the normal water use efficiency. So this index, it is telling us that how the water use efficiency of the system changed during a drought event. So if our ecosystems are resilient, then we expect them to use their water more efficiently, which means that water use efficiency dry should be greater than the normal water use efficiency. Therefore, if this ratio or this index value is greater than 1, then we classify those ecosystems as resilient ecosystem. And if the value is going below, which means that the ecosystems under the dry conditions, they were not able to maintain their productivity, then we call those ecosystems as non-resilient ecosystem. And these are further classified into 3 different classes based on the reduction of water use efficiency during the dry period. The figure on the right hand side, it shows the overall workflow for this analysis. So here we first compute water use efficiency, and for which we are using remote sensing based datasets for net primary production and evapotranspiration. Using these datasets, we are computing ecosystem water use efficiency at annual scale. Then the second task is to identify the drought period, identifying the period where the water availability was less. For this, we are using precipitation datasets and drought indices, which is a standard practice in the hydrological sciences. So using these 2 things, precipitation dataset and the drought index, we are identifying the drought period at different spatial scales. Then after knowing the water use efficiency and drought period, we are calculating the normal water use efficiency, which is long-term average water use efficiency of an ecosystem, as well as the water use efficiency during the dry period. Based on these 2, we finally compute the resilience index, and based on resilience index values, we classify the ecosystems into different classes of resilience. So as I mentioned earlier, that we applied this study at 2 different spatial scales in India. So for the first case study, we applied this framework at river basin scale in India. So we consider 22 different river basins in India as per the Watershed Atlas of India report by India Varis. I think these 22 river basins, they include all the major river basins in India, excluding some small river basins which do not flow, which are very small in size, such that it was not possible for us to have to perform this analysis on those river basins. This map, it shows the river basins that we have chosen for this study, and also the color in this map, it shows the mean annual precipitation, and we have higher precipitation in the Brahmaputra river basin and the Western Ghat river basin, and this precipitation, special variation of precipitation, is also linked to the ecosystem water use efficiency, which I will be discussing later. And another important aspect is the land covers. For example, different types of vegetations or different types of land cover, they have different primary productivity values, or they have different evapotranspiration values, which affects our study. So I think it's important to know that what part of country has which type of land cover. The most important one here is the forest, and we should keep in mind that we have large amount of forest in the northeast part of country, in the lower Himalayan range, and in the Western Ghat regions. And remaining parts of the country are mainly covered with the croplands, which covers around half of the country. And there are some other small land cover classes in different parts of the country. Now, this map here on the left-hand side, it shows us the variation in net primary production. So if we see this, then we have higher primary production in northeast of India, in lower Himalayan regions, and in the Western Ghat regions. So this is directly, it has direct correlation with the presence of the forest. And it is a well-known fact that forests have higher biomass, they have large biomass, and therefore their primary production is higher. However, the primary production for other classes such as croplands is comparatively low, and these we can see in the different regions. For example, the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which is mainly covered with the croplands, it has lesser net primary production compared to the forest-dominated areas. However, if we want to see the inter-annual variation, like how the net primary production is changing over the period of time, that we are representing here in terms of coefficient of variation, which is basically a ratio of standard deviation and the mean, and tells us the variation in the values. So here, for every pixel value, we are showing the coefficient of variation of the time series of NPP. So here we find that the coefficient of variation, which is variability, is higher in the western state of Rajasthan, or we can say in the arid regions or in the desert regions. And the reason is that this area, it is drought, like not drought, but it is deserts, and it is frequently affected by the drought. So the vegetation in these regions, it is highly dependent on the precipitation, and precipitation itself has very erratic nature in this region. So we see higher variation, higher interannual variation of primary productivity in this region compared to the remaining parts of the country. Similarly, if we see the spatial variation in evapotranspiration, we find somewhat similar trend here. We have higher evapotranspiration, like significantly higher evapotranspiration in Western Ghat regions, as well as in the northeastern part of the country. And if we see the lower Himalayan region, here we have moderately high, or like moderate amount of evapotranspiration. It is not that high. And the coefficient of variation in evapotranspiration, which is basically the temporal variability, is again higher in the western regions, western arid regions of the Rajasthan. And again, it can be explained with the erratic nature of the precipitation. Now, this map, it shows us the water use efficiency variation. Now, this is quite different from the previous maps, because we had higher net primary, we have higher net primary production in these regions, like for example, the forest dominated regions of the northeast, as well as in the forest dominated regions of the Western Ghat. However, what we find here is that water use efficiency is actually lower in this region, and it is high in lower Himalayan regions. And this can be explained from the variation of evapotranspiration. So if we see that evapotranspiration is actually moderately low in these regions, however, at the same time, these regions, they had moderately high net primary production. So when we talk about the efficiency of water use by the terrestrial ecosystem, then we find that it is actually higher at the lower Himalayan regions compared to the any other part of the country, including the forest dominated areas. And the coefficient of variation here is, for example, if we see the magnitude of coefficient of variation, then it is more related to the coefficient of variation in net primary production, which signifies that the ecosystem water use efficiency in India is mainly controlled by net primary production, but not the evapotranspiration. Now, if we talk about the water use efficiency at basin scale, which means that we are aggregating the value of water use efficiency for all the terrestrial ecosystems which are present in a river basin. For example, if we talk about the Indus River Basin, which is the #1 basin here, then we are taking the average of all the ecosystems which are present within this basin. So here what we find that the Brahmaputra River Basin, which is basin ID 2B here, it had the highest water use efficiency in India, and it was significantly high compared to all other river basins. And on the here right hand side, it again shows the similar things, but it compares mean water use efficiency of a basin, which is represented as a green bar, with the precipitation values. So the blue line here, it shows the average precipitation over a basin. So in general, what we see here is that these basins which have high precipitation values, they tend to have higher water use efficiency. But the exception here is the basin ID 14, which has very high mean annual precipitation, which means that it receives a large amount of precipitation. However, the water use efficiency here is very less. So this basin is basically this region along the Western Ghats. And as we saw previously, that this region has very high rate of evapotranspiration. Due to this high rate of evapotranspiration, most of this water which is available for the ecosystem for its productivity is actually lost in terms of evapotranspiration, and it is not well utilized by the vegetation. That's why we have lesser water use efficiency in this region compared to the other parts of the country. And another important thing here is this red bar. This red bar here, it shows the inter-basin variations, which means like if we see the variation of water use efficiency between different pixels within the basin, or like spatial variation, that is represented in terms of the standard deviation of values within the basins. And it is very high for the basin ID1, which is Indus River Basin. And the reason is very clear here, because this river basin has some parts of Rajasthan's deserts, like the Thar deserts, which are the arid land. At the same time, the middle part of this basin, it has forests, and like, it has the regions of Punjab, which are very agriculturally very active. So when we talk about the variation within the basin, so this basin stand out compared to all other basins. The next thing now to analyze that why we have so much variation in water use efficiency and what are the controlling factors behind this spatial variation. We analyze the water use efficiency for different land cover types. So here, this figure on the right hand side, it's showing the water use efficiency for major land covers in India. For example, we have 5 different forest types here, and then we have grasslands, croplands, and another form of cropland, which is cropland and natural vegetation mosaics. So these are the major concepts that we try to analyze to understand why we have such a large variation in water use efficiency. And here what we found is that in general, the forest classes, the forest land cover types, they tend to have higher water use efficiency compared to the croplands. So like, and even the grasslands. So wherever there is a significant presence of forests, that region tends to have higher water use efficiency, such as the Brahmaputra River Basin. We have large amount of forest in this basin. So this basin in general had higher water use efficiency. However, it should be noted that when we talk about a river basin, we are taking the average value of all the ecosystems which are present in that river basin. So even though sometimes we can have presence of forest in some regions, but because of the presence of some other types of land covers, that basin can have lower water use efficiency as a whole. Now, the second factor which could affect the water use efficiency is the climate. And in India, we have a drastic like contrast in terms of the climates in different regions. For example, we have arid climate in the western part of the country. We have temperate climate in the, let's say, Ganga and Brahmaputra river basins. Similarly, like the variation in climate is very drastic as we move from south to north or from west to east. So to analyze this influence, we also try to compute the average water use efficiency for different climate types. And here we find, and here we are considering this climate classification, which is called Köppen classification. It divides climates into 4 to 5 different classes, and it assigns them letters like AM. So basically, B here is the arid climate, A is the tropical climate, and C is the temperate climate. So what we found here is the temperate climate, which is CWA and CWB classes of this classification. It had higher water use efficiency compared to the other climate types. So, and if we see Brahmaputra river basin, then it is completely covered with the temperate climate types. And this could be one of the reasons that why we found the highest water use efficiency in this basin. Now, talking about the ecosystem resilience, so we the proposed methodology, the method that we proposed, we applied that method at river basin scale in India, and here is what we found. So, as I said, that we performed our analysis at 22 different river basins, and we found that only 6 river basins out of these 22 river basins were resilient. The basins which are marked in green color here, they are the basins which were found resilient to drought conditions. However, most of the river basins, apart from these 6, like all the river basins, they were found non-resilient, but they had different tendency or different degree of non-resilience. For example, some basins such as Ganga basins, here the basin ID2A, it was found slightly non-resilient, which means that although the basin as a whole was not able to maintain its water use efficiency, or the terrestrial ecosystems in the basin were not able to maintain their productivity or the water use efficiency in their dry conditions, but the decrease in water use efficiency was not very significant. The major I won't call problem, the main basins which we need to focus on are these basins in the red color. So these are the basins where we found that there was a drastic reduction in water use efficiency under the dry conditions. So, and these basins are located in the central part of the country, for example, Narmada Basin and the neighboring basins. So the basins, for some reason, that are in the central part of the country, they tend to have lower resilience values or the lower resilience to the drought conditions. Now, again, to understand this variation or this contrast in the basin's response to drought conditions, we analyze the land cover, different land covers and different climate types in terms of their resilience, so that we can understand that what are the factors which are influencing the ecosystem's resilience at river basin scale. So here what we found that the only two classes which are evergreen forest, they were found resilient. However, other classes of forest or other land covers such as grasslands, they were not found resilient. And the presence of these classes, for example, large forest cover in Brahmaputra basin, it somehow explains the resilience of the river basin as a whole. But at the same time, there were some other river basins which were found resilient and they don't have large forest cover, which means that there are some other factors which are influencing the response of a basin to the droughts, but we cannot identify them with this framework, or like we need to have data set for other key variables which could influence the response of a basin to the drought conditions. Similarly, when we analyze the climate types, then again we found that the temperate climate tend to have higher resilience compared to the other land cover other climate types, which again explains the resilience of Brahmaputra river basins. Brahmaputra river basin. However, there are basins which doesn't have this climate and they still are found resilient, which again highlights that there are some factors which we are missing here, and those factors are playing a major role in the response of the basin. Now, as I said previously, that we can compute this water use efficiency in different ways. So here we try to see that what if we change this, the quantification of water use efficiency, will the results of our resilience analysis will still be same, or will there be any difference in the results? So what we did here is that we use gross primary production instead of the net primary production to estimate water use efficiency, and then using the same approach of resilience, we try to see that if there is a change in the in our results, if we are using a different indicator for water use efficiency or not. So the whole framework remains same. The only difference is that here we have replaced gross primary production with, net primary production with the gross primary production, and therefore the water use efficiency is now GPP based water use efficiency rather than NPP based water use efficiency. And we are again computing the resilience index based on these water use efficiency values. And to give you an idea about the spatial variation of water use efficiency at river basin scale, so this map, it shows the variation in gross primary production. Again, like net primary production, as these two things are very closely related, so we have almost the same spatial variation, such as that we have higher gross primary production in the forest dominated northeast regions, or in the Western Ghat regions, where we also have significant presence of forest. However, but it was lower for the western regions, which are the arid regions, and we don't have much of vegetation or the terrestrial ecosystems in these regions. And this figure, it again shows a similar thing, like it shows the space variation for different river basins, and the purpose here is to show that how the variation of GPP for different basins, which is the upper part of the figure, is similar to the variation of NPP, which is the net primary production for different basins. So if we see that overall the pattern is somewhat similar, but the only thing is that here we are not getting very high spikes for the basin 2B, which is Barak basin, neighboring basin to the Brahmaputra basin. However, in case of GPP, the values are somewhat similar for most of the basins. And in general, the values of not GPP, but this is, oh, I'm sorry. So this is the water use efficiency with respect to GPP, and this is the water use efficiency with respect to net primary production. And in general, we see that the GPP based water use efficiency is higher compared to the NPP based water use efficiency, and this is because the GPP itself is the GPP itself does have higher values compared to NPP, because when we compute NPP, we subtract the autotrophic respiration from the GPP, which means that GPP values are higher, so GPP based water use efficiency itself is higher. Now, when we perform this analysis, the resilience analysis, considering the GPP based water use efficiency, so we found that now we had 7 basins which are resilient. Like overall, the pattern of resilience and non-resilient basin was same, but here we found that there was one additional basin which was found resilient if we use GPP based water use efficiency, and it highlights that the choice of indicator is very important. Like as I said earlier, that whenever we want to perform a resilience analysis, it is very important that we choose an indicator which can quantitatively and which can effectively tell us the performance of the system. So like if the indicator should be such that we should choose an indicator which is generalized, that the resilience analysis should not be affected much if we choose a better indicator, or like if we change the indicator. So here what we found that the overall pattern remains same. However, there are small changes in terms of the number of basins which are resilient and which are non-resilient. So in a nutshell, what we found is that using GPP based water use efficiency gives us the results in such a way that the basins tend to have higher resilience. For example, earlier the Brahmaputra basin was found the most resilient basin, and here the Indus basin was found to be the most resilient basin. And the basins with severely non-resilient characteristics were reduced. For example, previously we had these basins, basin 93 and 8, which were also not severely non-resilient, but GPP based analysis suggests us that these basins are actually not severely non-resilient, but they are still resilient to a different extent. So here we can compare the results for 2 different methods, like once when we are using NPP and the second one when we are using GPP. So if you see that overall the spatial variation is somewhat similar, but the only thing is that here in case of NPP based method, we had some basins which were found severely non-resilient, but however now they are not in that category, but the category has been changed, but they are still non-resilient. Now, so far we have been talking about the ecosystem resilience at the basin scale, but basins are generally very large in size, and it is not very effective if we talk about like these big basins, because in general there is a large land cover variation within the basin. For example, if we talk about Brahmaputra basin or the Ganga basin, so these basins are so large in size, so that there could be different elements within the basins which may not be resilient or which may be resilient, but the overall response of basin is the different from them. So therefore, to do this study at a higher spatial scale, we use the same framework at district scale. So we chose around 640 river basins in India, which are shown in this map, and we try to see that how the results of ecosystem resilience framework would change if we perform it at a different spatial scale. Now, if we see the spatial variation of net primary production or evapotranspiration at district scale, now this is different from the maps that I presented previously, although the spatial variation still remains same. But what we are doing here, we are taking the average of the net primary production over a whole district. So within a district, we can have different types of ecosystem. For example, in a particular district, we can have forest, we can have cropland at the same time. We can even have the urban lands, which doesn't even have any vegetation. So like when we are talking about the district scale NPP or ET values, those are the average value for all types of ecosystems which are present in those districts. So in general, we found that the NPP was higher in the regions of higher presence of forest, for example, in the northeast India or in the Western Ghat regions, and even some parts of the lower Himalayan regions, for example, some parts of Uttarakhand or Himachal, these have significant presence of forest, and these regions tend to have higher net primary production. And similarly, for evapotranspiration, again, we find that it is higher in the northeastern parts as well as in the Western Ghat parts. And then we computed the water use efficiency at district scale. Again, here we found that the lower Himalayan region, it tend to have higher water use efficiency compared to the other parts of the country. And if we talk about the variation or the intra-annual variation in the water use efficiency, then again we find that it was higher for the region. So it was higher in the regions where we have low water use efficiency. However, the intra-annual variation is low in the regions where we have higher water use efficiency. Then to understand the temporal variation, like how this water use efficiency is varying over the time, or how is it affected by the climate change, then we performed a trend analysis to see that if we can find any significant increasing or decreasing trend in water use efficiency and whether we can link it to the climate change or not. So what we found here is that the central part of the country, these regions, they had higher water use efficiency. However, they had the increasing trend in water use efficiency. However, these are the regions which actually had low water use efficiency. However, the regions which had higher water use efficiency, for example, these lower Himalayan part of the country, it had a decreasing trend. Like here we are getting, like we are observing something opposite, like the regions which had high water use efficiency, they had negative trend, which means that their values are decreasing with the climate change. However, the regions which had lower water use efficiencies, their water use efficiency is increasing with time. And it should be noted that out of all the river basins, there were around 22% of the, so not the river basin, but districts. So out of all the 640 districts, there were around only 22% of districts for which we could find significant increasing or decreasing trend. Otherwise, in most of the other cases, we had trend in the like in the district level water use efficiency, but it was not significant at every single district.
Mr. Astos, Dr. Astos, I have a
Yeah.
question here.
Yes.
I have a question here. How you have calculated the trade? I mean,
So, yeah.
how it is significant? Why it is significant? In what value you can say this is significant or not?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, what we did here, the trend we are computing is a linear trend. Like we can simply find out the coefficient of a linear equation if we fit it to the data, and the coefficient will give us the trend. However, to find whether the trend is significant or not, we have some non-parametric tests. For example, we have a test called Mann-Kendall trend test, which like it has some, it can tell us about whether the trend that we are finding at a particular time series, is it significant or not. So like it can give us a p-value, and we can p-value is basically the probability value of type 1 error. So this p-value can tell us whether the trend is really significant at a basin or not. And so like this Mann-Kendall test will tell us whether trend is significant or not, and based on the values of linear trend, we can see that whether trend is increasing or decreasing.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much.
I hope I have answered. Thank you. So what we found here, what I was saying, that yeah, we found that in most of the cases we had increasing trend in the districts which had low water use efficiency. However, it was opposite for the districts which had higher water use efficiency. And also, I think I don't have a figure here, but if we compute the trend in the water use efficiency for the whole country, then we find that in India, the water use overall we are getting a increasing trend in the water use efficiency for the country average water use efficiency. And if we compare it with some global studies, like which have computed the trend in the water use efficiency for the whole globe, then they have found that for the whole world, the water use efficiency is actually decreasing. But in India, we found in our study that it is opposite. Like in India, uh, the water use efficiency was increasing for the same period of the analysis. Now, at district scale, we try to find out the average water use efficiency for different land covers. But here, what we did that we selected the base districts with respect to the dominant land cover type in the basin. So, like if a district has large amount of forest, then we call that district as the forest dominated district. And similarly, if a district has large cropland, then we call that cropland dominated district. So we try to see that how the presence of the different land covers within a basin is affecting the average water use efficiency of the basin. So what we found here is that the forest dominated districts, they again tend to have higher water use efficiency because of the presence of the forest, and the districts which had some other croplands, they tend to have higher water use efficiency. The important thing is that when we talk about forest dominated districts, it doesn't mean that the whole district is covered with forest. Like it just says that we have more than 40% forest cover in that district. At the same time, the district can have other land cover types such as croplands or grasslands. So this is the aggregated response of all the land covers or all the terrestrial ecosystems which are present in that district. Now the next step is to identify the drought period. So in this case, we used an index called Palmer Drought Severity Index, which is one among the many drought indices which are available in the literature. And I think this index is one of the most widely used indicator of the drought. So in this study, we computed this index for different not river basins, but for different districts in the country. And we try to identify the drought period or the period where there was a drastic reduction in the rainfall compared to the normal rainfall. So this map on the right hand side shows us the value of PDSI, which is a drought indicator here for different districts. So generally PDSI can have any value from -5 or maybe less than -5, from -10 to +10. The negative is the value. Like if the value is negative, it shows that there's a drought condition, which means that the precipitation during that period was less than the normal precipitation. So for example, if the value is less than -1, if it is between -1 to 0, then we call it near normal, which means that though there was slight reduction in precipitation, but it's not significant. And as value goes below -1, we classify different classes of drought. For example, if the value is less than -1, then that kind of drought condition is called exceptional drought condition. And similarly, there are different classes of drought which we can classify our systems based on PDSI. So what we found that, so what we did is that initially we selected a drought year for every district, like based on the precipitation values of the past precipitation that we have. We selected 1 year for every district, in which year, this is the year in which the district received the least rainfall. And then we calculated the PDSI value for that particular year so that we can validate the drought condition. For example, if there's a district here and we are saying that in 2010, this district had the least rainfall, but just to validate whether it was really a drought condition or not, we use this index called PDSI. And then we check the value of PDSI for that particular year in every district. And then we actually found that whatever years we selected, the most parts of the country, like the most of the districts, they actually had the drought conditions for their respective driest years. And in most of the cases, the drought was either moderate or or even the worst. Like in most of the cases, the drought conditions were really severe in most of the districts that we chose and the years that we chose. Then the next step was to analyze the resilience of different districts. So here is the final map that we got, like the resilience map where we classify different districts based on their resilience to the droughts. So what we found is that out of 634 districts that we considered in this study, actually we considered most of the river basins. We only excluded some river basins which are either on the islands, for example, in the Andaman Nicobar or other islands, or we excluded some of the districts which are so small in size that it was not possible for us to perform this analysis. Otherwise, we tried to include all the districts in our study. So what we found that out of these 634 districts that we considered, only 241 districts were resilient to dry conditions, which are represented in the green color here. And if we talk in terms of the percentage area of the country, like if we compute the area, then we find that around 31% area in the country was found resilient, and like remaining part of the country was found non-resilient to different extents. For example, 27% of the part of the country was found slightly non-resilient, and 12% was found moderately non-resilient, and generally around 30% part of the country were found severely non-resilient, which are represented in the red color. However, one important thing is that earlier when we performed our analysis at river basin scale, we found that this whole region in the central India was non-resilient. However, if we change the spatial scale, for example, this study we performed at district scale, the results are quite different. Like now at district scale, the analysis shows us that this region in the western part of the country or in the state of Maharashtra, this is the region which is not severely not resilient. So it is very important while framing up some policies or while using these studies for some policy, we have to choose the right scale of our analysis so that we can identify the regions which are actually non-resilient based on the target of our policy. For example, if we want to make some policies only for a particular state, then maybe we can go for a higher resolution study rather than relying on a district level study. Another analysis that we did here is to see that how much area in different states is resilient. Like, so here this map, it shows different states in the country, and we try to see that how, like, what percentage of area in different states is resilient. Actually, we wanted to identify the states which were least resilient as well as the states which were more resilient. So as we can see here that this map actually shows around all the 29 river basin, 29 states and one union territory, which is Delhi. So like these are the 30 states plus UTs that we included in this study. So as we can see here that the states which are there in the, I would say, like lower Himalayan regions or which are close to the Himalayas, they tend to have more resilient area. For example, Sikkim was the only state which had 100% resilient area. Like most of the districts within the state of Sikkim, they were found resilient. In Himachal Pradesh or Uttarakhand or Punjab, like these regions which are either very close to Himalayas or are very agriculturally active, they tend to have higher percentage of resilient area. And out of these 30 states plus UT, only 10 states and UTs had more than 50% of resilient area, which means that there are around 20 states or UT which have, in which like more than 50% of the area is not resilient. And surprisingly, we found that two of the states, one is Chhattisgarh and other one is Rajasthan, they didn't even have a single district as a resilient district. And in the northeast part of the country, if we see, although most of the states, they tend to have higher resilient value, but the Assam was the one which had the least percentage of the resilient area. It had only 20% of resilient area. Then,
Dr. Ashutosh, I have a question in previous slide.
Yeah, sure.
Please, in this slide, yeah. Just you said in the in terms of river basin, the part of Gujarat or Rajasthan was resilient, but in this presentation, in this slide, you are showing that Rajasthan portion is not resilient. Why it is like this? The both are
Yeah,
conflicting.
yes, that's an interesting observation. So in that yes. So in that slide, if you remember, then we were considering the river basin. So in that case, this region was actually a part of Indus River Basin.
Industry. Yes.
And when we talk about Indus River Basin, then these regions of Himachal, Punjab, and Haryana, and even J&K, they were also part of the river basin, which means that overall the response of the river basin was resilient, but within the river basins we have different parts which are not resilient. So that's why I mentioned that it is very important that we choose the right scale, right spatial scale when we are using this analysis for some policy frameworks. For example, if our focus is only on the identifying basins so that we can make some basin management plans, then we can go for basin scale analysis. However, if we really want to target one specific district or one very small location, then we have to go for a different scale of spatial resolution so that we can identify the hotspots within those states or districts. And to answer your question, I would say that that was in basin scale, it was the collective response of the basin. However, here we are looking into the response of the district. So like those are two different scales, because when we are dividing our ecosystems at different spatial scale, then we are also dividing the types of the ecosystem which are present in there. So it is like quite possible that even if, for example, here if this, for example, this district, it is non-resilient. However, if we try to look into this district at a very high spatial resolution, then we may find that there are some part of this district which are resilient, but overall the response of district is not, the terrestrial ecosystem in this district is not resilient. I hope I have cleared your
Okay,
doubt.
okay. Yeah, you have cleared the doubt. But one more question I have in the next slide.
Yes,
In
yes,
next
sure.
slide, next slide. Yeah, the area of the non-resident area, just like Jammu, Kashmir, and Rajasthan, and the
Mhm.
area of Punjab, Haryana, UK, and very less as compared to the Jammu and Kashmir. In terms of, if when you talk about the river basin system, so the area of river basin system is including the Jammu, Kashmir, Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan as well. So it
Yes.
will is there any weightage of area, land of area?
Uh, I no, there's actually no weightage of area to this analysis. For example, when we are talking about a state, then it is just the average value of that state. So like, as we are taking the average of the state, then I don't think we
Okay,
need to assign any weight. We
okay,
need to
okay,
assign the
okay,
weight
okay.
if like if we have to sum up the values, but as we are just taking the average, so it is the area is
Average for
automatically
the
taken
average
into
for
consideration.
the state. Okay, this is the
Yes.
average for the state, means single
Ye-
value.
yes. So
Okay,
if we are
okay,
taking the
nice.
averages, then I think the area is already taken care of. So we need not to explicitly like include the area in our analysis.
Okay, okay, okay.
And
Thank you
even
so
if you
much. Thank
see, okay, yes,
Yeah,
welcome.
yeah.
So
Tell me.
if you
Yeah.
if you see the values of net primary production, then those are generally in terms of grams of carbon per meter square, which means that we are when we are considering the distribution of NPP, then we are already considering the area, like we are representing the value in terms of the per square of area, like how much biomass is presented per unit of area. So like area is also considered there. So we need not to consider the area while performing this analysis.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you so much. And continue.
Okay. So then we try to see that how what are the controlling factor for the district scale, like how the district scale resilience is controlled by presence of the forest of the land or the climate types. So what we found that the forest dominated districts, so here we are talking about forest dominated districts, not the forests only. Like previously when I talked about forest, I was talking about only the regions which had forest, like at a very higher resolution. But here we are talking about the forest dominated districts. So these are the districts which have more than 40% forest regions. So they tend to have higher resilience values. So for example, if we see this chart on the right hand side, so the RD value is higher for forests compared to the other other land cover types. So, and if we look into the districts in India, then what we found that there were around 75 districts which had forest cover greater than 40%, and out of these districts, more than 50% of districts were resilient, which means that the presence of forest is actually somehow linked to the resilient characteristics at the district scale. And at the same time, the cropland, which is the largest land cover type in India, so more than 65% of the districts which were dominated by cropland were found non-resilient, which means that large presence of cropland within a region is linked to the non-resilience. However, it is not very clear, because there may be cases where there are districts with more than 40% or more than 80% forest cover and still they are not resilient, which highlights that there are many other eco-hydrological factors such as some climate factors which are influencing the response of the ecosystems to the drought conditions. Yeah, I have mentioned here that it is not very, we cannot really explain the ecosystem resilience characteristics of any region based on these two factors. We might have to include many other factors which might be controlling these responses. So to conclude this work, what we found here is that there is a large spatial variation in terms of primary production, evapotranspiration or water use efficiency at district scale as well as river basin scales. And in general, the forest dominated regions, they tend to have higher water use efficiency because of the presence of forest, and forests have higher productivity. And water use efficiency on the other hand was significantly higher for lower Himalayan regions, not for the Western Ghat regions where we have higher NPP. And we found increasing trend in water use efficiency in the central region. This is a region which have lower water use efficiency. However, the regions with a higher water use efficiency, such as lower Himalayan regions, they had a decreasing trend in water use efficiency. And if we compare different land cover types or the biomes types, then we find that forest covers generally have higher water use efficiency. And in terms of the resilience, we found that most of the parts of the country, around 60% part of the country, was not resilient to dry conditions. Now, what are the implications of this resilience to the climate change? Like, what can we imply from these results, that what will happen under the conditions of climate change if we have this kind of resilience characteristics at different spatial scales in India? So the results of this study, basically this is the first of its kind. The study is the first of its kind to relate the ecosystem's resilience to droughts at different spatial scales in India. And from here we can see that we are able to identify some of the hotspots or some of the regions in the country which are not very resilient. And at the same time, if we see some studies on the climate change impacts in India, then we find that there is increasing trend in the drought severity and frequency in some parts of the country. And if these trends keep on increasing, then it implies that we will have more of these hydroclimatic disturbances in India. And given the fact that most of the parts of the country are non-resilient to such conditions, it will be like these drastic conditions of the droughts will significantly affect the net primary production under these regions of the country, and which will also affect the let's say food production, because NPP is also linked to the crop yield. So if our systems which are non-resilient, they face droughts in the future, then it will have a serious impact on the food production or the crop yields in different parts of the country. In addition to this, the net primary production of the terrestrial ecosystem, they also play a very important role in carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration is basically a process through which we capture the carbon dioxide from atmosphere and we store it in the biomass, in the soil, in terms of biomass. So in this process of carbon sequestration, the terrestrial ecosystems, they play a major role. Like, they are the ones which are capturing the carbon dioxide in the form of through the process called photosynthesis. But if So due to this reason, we see terrestrial ecosystem as one of the most effective solutions to climate change. Like, we expect that if we have large forest covers, then these forest covers or these vegetations, they will try to remove carbon dioxide from atmosphere, and which can eventually prevent the like catastrophic effects of climate change. But what we are finding here is that these terrestrial ecosystems, they themselves are adversely affected by climate change, which means that on the one hand, we are expecting these ecosystems to uh, like to prevent the climate change or to uh, remove the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but due to climate change, they are also affected, which means that uh, they won't be working as efficient under drastic climate change conditions, and it will be really difficult for us to then, in that condition, to remove the excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And non-resilient characteristics of these ecosystems will surely have a very drastic impact on the food security of the region. That's it from my side. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer the questions or the doubts of any of the audience.
Thank you so much for your very informative presentation, Dr. Ashutosh Sharma. And this is very informative for us, and especially for the researchers, those are working on droughts. And because in India now, number of droughts events are happening. Even in the Maharashtra, number of farmers has committed suicide due to the drought condition, due to the loss of crops and all. So this is very informative presentation for us. So I'm just asking the audience to ask some questions. If you have any question, they can ask, or they can simply write on the chat box. So I can ask directly. I can ask to Dr. Ashutosh Sharma. And okay.
Yes, I
Any
think.
question?
Yeah.
Or Dr. Ashutosh Sharma, directly you can answer the question from the chat.
Okay, I'll look into the chat.
No, there is no question till now. There is no
Okay.
question till now.
So I would say, like,
So
feel
any
free to ask
question from the
anything. It may not have to be related to my research. Like, if you are interested in knowing how can you use this kind of framework in your research, I would be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, he's a very great scientist. So if you have any question, if you are planning to go for the PhD, and also you can ask any question related to water resources and related to climate change, anything related to hydrological modeling and all. So he's very expert in that.
Yeah, surely I would try my best to answer your questions, like anything related to water sources or maybe anything in general. Like, if I'm able to answer them, it would be my pleasure.
I think Dr. Shivam is there. Dr. Shivam is there, previous expert. He can also ask some question. Dr. Shivam. Okay. I think I have some question, because this is very interesting presentation for me as well, because I am also related to water resource engineer. I also did PhD in water resources.
I'd be happy to answer.
So I have some question related to your questions, just like what kind of data set you have used? What are the source of the data set? Just like you have used for to calculating the land use cover for the district level and for the basin level. What kind of data set you have used, and what are the sources?
Okay, so here, if you see this map, so here I have mentioned that we are using a remote sensing based data set from a satellite called MODIS. So MODIS is basically a hyperspectral satellite which provides different bands of information, and from this, the NASA, or like, there are some institutions which are providing data set on net primary production and evapotranspiration. Here we have used those data set. For example, the net primary production data set, it is based on the energy use efficiency method, like so, and the evapotranspiration data set, it is based on Feynman-Monteith equation. I think we all must have heard about it. So we are using those data set from the source, which is MODIS or the NASA. And for precipitation, we have used the precipitation records from IMD, Indian Meteorological Department. And further, for the drought analysis, we computed the drought indices ourselves. So here we have used an index called Standardized Precipitation Index, which is one of the most widely used drought indices in the field of hydrology. And apart from this, I think you mentioned the land cover also. So for land cover, actually there are different land cover maps which are available from different agencies and at different resolutions. But just to stay consistent with the MODIS dataset of NPP and ET that we have used here, we use the land cover dataset from the MODIS, and I think it is freely available. If someone just like Googles it, then they can directly go to NASA's website and they can download these datasets and they can use for their own studies.
Okay. Okay, one more question. You have talked about SPI and drought
Yes.
index. So can you elaborate what is this SPI and how we can calculate this SPI using precipitation data set?
Okay, so SPI
Little
is,
bit.
yeah, sure. SPI is basically is a standardized precipitation index. So as its name suggests, what we are doing, we are standardizing the precipitation values in such a way that the precipitation data we are transforming it to standard normal distribution. Like, for example, if we have monthly precipitation data, the SPI values are generally computed based on monthly precipitation data. What we do is that we take the precipitation record at any station, and then we fit that precipitation data to a gamma distribution or any other distribution which fits well. We can like check the goodness of it or the distribution, but gamma distribution is the one which is generally used. So we are fitting the distribution to our precipitation data, and then from the CDF of that distribution, we transform this gamma distribution to the normal distribution. And our final goal is to have a normal distribution which is standardized, like which has zero mean and standard deviation is equal to 1. And the Z values from this standard distribution are considered as the SPI values. And if you want to compute like the SPI value for a particular region, for example, if you want to study one specific point and if you want to identify the drought period, then there are some packages available which can directly do these computations for you. For example, I remember there's a package in R programming, there's a package in MATLAB as well, which you can, like, there are some functions that you can directly use, and if you have monthly rainfall data, then that functions will directly give you the SPI values. And otherwise, you can do it manually also, but it's not very difficult task. So based on monthly precipitation values, you can compute SPI value for every month, and based on the values of SPI, then you can identify that which month had drought conditions or what was the severity of the drought condition in that particular month.
We can calculate for the number of months, just like 6 months, 3 months, or yearly basis as well.
Oh yes, that's another aspect of SPI. So SPI, when we are computing SPI, then we can also mention the time scale for the SPI values. By time scale, we mean that if, for example, if we are considering a time scale of 3 months, then we will be comparing the aggregated values for 3 months. So we won't be comparing values at every month scale, but the values that we are comparing, the precipitation value that we will be comparing will be aggregated for 3 months. So the main advantage of these time scales is that if we want to study a long-term drought, for example, 6-month drought or a drought condition which sustains for 12 months, then we can use the time scale of longer duration, and this will tell us that whether the drought condition was there for a longer duration or not. Because in general, if there is a lesser precipitation for 1 or 2 months, then we don't really consider that as a drought. But droughts are the events which are longer in duration. So that we can do with SPI. Like we can choose a time scale of corresponding to our application, and then it will help us in identifying different types of drought. And another thing is that, for example, in generally we classify droughts in different classes. For example, we have meteorological drought, we have hydrological drought, we have agricultural drought. Meteorological droughts are the one which are based on the precipitation data sets. Hydrological droughts are the one which happens when we have lesser water storage in our reservoirs or lakes, or we have significant reduction in the stream flow values. And the agricultural drought, we generally represent those conditions as the conditions when we have significantly reduced soil moisture in the soil, so that it cannot be sufficient for the plants to grow. However, in general, what we happen, like if we want to study the hydrological drought, then we should have data set on storage, water storage, or the stream flow, and it is not available, especially in countries like India. We have a large scarcity of these observations. In this case, if we are using SPI value and we are choosing a time scale of longer duration, then it can help us in identifying those kind of conditions also. Because if hydrological drought will occur only after there's a significant reduction in precipitation over a longer duration, let's say at least for 3 or 4 months. So if we are choosing a longer time scale in SPI, then this index can also identify the conditions of hydrological or agricultural droughts.
Okay, so can we use the means you have used only meteorological droughts. You have considered only meteorological droughts. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so can we use other agricultural drought or some hydrological droughts to assess this analysis?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And in fact, we have tried, like I think not here, but in a separate study, we have tried to see that what happens if we identify droughts based on soil moisture conditions. The soil moisture is more linked to primary productions or the terrestrial ecosystem than the precipitation. So we have tried to explore that what happens if we identify drought conditions based on soil moisture, and then we try to evaluate the resilience of the systems. And we found that using soil moisture is actually a better way to is a better way to identify the drought conditions, especially the agricultural drought conditions, which are more linked to the productivity of terrestrial ecosystems rather than just using the precipitation data. But the problem here is that we don't really have the observed data set for the soil moisture. So we have to rely on some remote sensing based data sets, and most of the times these remote sensing based data sets, they are not very accurate, because these satellites are like, these products are global in nature, like they are produced by different global agencies, and they don't really evaluate the performance of their data sets for Indian conditions. So that's why we try to avoid using these data set, but it is interesting to use soil moisture data, and I think it will help in improving the results.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for your
any
questions.
other question from the audience? Any question from the audience? If you are related to water resource engineering and you want to pursue the PhD, or if you are a researcher, then you can ask. This is the best time to grab the knowledge.
No one is really interested in what I was talking about.
No, they are interested. I think you have cleared all the doubts. That's why they don't have any question.
And even if like you have some doubts after my presentation, you can reach out to me on my email ID or something. I will be happy to answer the questions.
Okay. Just show us the email ID here, so we can just write it down.
So maybe I'll be writing my email ID in the chat box.
Okay.
And in addition to this presentation, if you have any doubts, like maybe you can ask me, and I'll try my best to answer the questions regarding anything in water sources or anything else, like whatever you think that I could help you.
I have the last question.
Sure.
Just like you said, the number of...
So, hello. Hello. I can't hear you.
Number of statistics and non-resilient, because this is very necessary.
Actually, I can't hear.
How we have to act like this? We have to handshake with
the
environment. Okay, now it's coming. Now voice is coming clearly.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yep. Can you please repeat?
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So my question is what should be the what steps should be the for the make non-resident area to the resilient? How we can make our river basin scale or district non-resilient districts and river basins to make to resilient?
I think that's a very hard task to do because it is more of a natural
No, but
process.
we cannot, yeah, we cannot do
But
it,
what we have found, like,
but we are researchers, so we have to
yes,
plan,
yes.
like we have to circulate the policies and we have to just circulate the information to the government so they can just plan like this.
So, like, what we have found, like, for example, if I talk about one other study that we did, that we found that the states which have large or which have like significant deforestation activities going on, they are the one who are currently more affected by, like, they are the one where the ecosystem resilience or ecosystem's response is worst affected compared to the states where deforestation activities are less. For example, in one of our study, we found that the Uttarakhand and 3 states in the northeast which have significant presence of forest, they are the one which are worst affected by the development activities. For example, any industrial activity or the economic activity. So the best thing that we can do is to stop deforestation, like, because these are the factors which are actually directly linked to the ecosystems or even to the climate. For example, if we say if we stop deforestation, or if we grow more trees, then it will not only help us in enhancing the ecosystem's resilience, but it is also a very efficient solution for long-term climate change mitigations, or for like in general we call it carbon sequestration, but just in simple terms we can say that it can help us to remove the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which will surely help us in adapting or mitigating the climate change.
Okay,
So
thank you so
that's
much.
the, like, okay, welcome. I think there are many other things that can be done, but for researchers like us, I think it's out of scope. Maybe government can take action. For example,
Yeah,
this study, it was,
government and normal human, we should take one step ahead to make it resilient, because every person, the contribution of every person can
yeah,
make the changes.
I agree with you, and I think the
Because
best thing that we
deforestation
can
and
do is to stop deforestation and to grow more trees, but it does not only help us in ecosystem thing, but it can also help us in different ways by mitigating the climate change, maintaining the temperatures. For example, recently I was reading a publication of article which mentioned that the regions which had higher, like more number of trees, they tend to have lower temperatures, and eventually it will help you in terms of like lesser electricity bills, because you will not be using the ACs. So, like, generally we don't understand the long term benefit of growing trees, or like doing these kind of things, but these really affect our day-to-day life, and we should consider these things very seriously.
okay, okay, okay. Thank you so much for your great presentation and very informative for us. So thank you so much, audience. Thank you so much, everyone, and for attending this FDP session. And the next session will start at 1:30 sharp. 1:30. Please join before the time, so it will be useful for us, because then you can understand from the beginning to end. And the next expert is Dr. Arpit Choksey from ISRO, IIRS ISRO, and he's working since 2011 as a scientist. So please be present, and thank you so much all again.
Okay, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Dr. Goswami, and I see that HOD is also there, so I want to thank you as well for inviting me for this talk. It's really a pleasure presenting my research in front of you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Sharma.
Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sumit. Thank you, Prachi. I don't really know you all, but thank you so much for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Good day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you.
Our HOD sir is there. He want to say something about presentation. Ashutosh Sharma, Dr. Ashutosh, our
Yes,
HOD
yes,
sir
I
is
can hear
there.
you. Hello,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's really a pleasure talking in front of you.
It is our pleasure. Thank you, doctor, for a kind presentation. Nice
Thank you,
presentation.
sir. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
think we
Okay.
can continue.